I was driving through one of the worst storms I'd ever seen. I was on a road trip, but not to anywhere in particular. I was exploring the countryside when I found myself lost on a wooded road. One of those winding ones in the hills with trees on either side of it. I had just come down a hill, and my speed was probably a little higher than it should have been. I hit a wet patch, and my car hydroplaned just as lightning struck a tree up ahead. I knew I was going to hit it, and ducked just before its branches penetrated my windshield. I was lucky that I'd survived. The entire front of my car was crumpled, and smoke was coming out of the engine. I tried to use my phone from inside the car, but there was no signal. I was way in the middle of nowhere. I looked around, trying to think of what my next move would be. Through the trees and up a long driveway, there was a single, solitary Gothic manor. A large house belonging to some wealthy person, no doubt. There were no other houses around, and I wondered if they owned all this land. It was raining so much that through its open windshield, water had started to flood my car. I felt that I had no other choice. I hopped the stone wall next to the driveway gate and made my way up through the trees. It was truly one of the largest houses I'd ever seen. I used the brass knocker on the carved oak door, although I wasn't sure if anyone lived there, or if anyone would hear me over the thunder. I looked through the windows, but they were too fogged to see inside. I was looking around on the ground for a brick or a stone. I wasn't about to wait forever, but then the door opened slowly, and an old man peeked out at me. He had a hunched back, and his head craned way down, and yet we were eye to eye. He must have been a very tall man when he was younger. He looked to be around 90 years old, or at least that's the story his wrinkles told. "Can I help you, young man?" the old fellow breathed. "Is it all right if I come in to take shelter from this storm?" I asked. "Very well, come inside." He opened the door wider, gesturing. I entered the foyer, dripping wet. A statue of a bronze gargoyle sat on a podium in the center of the room. A carved oak staircase wrapped up to the mezzanine from left to right. Large artworks hung on every wall, most of them portraits of dreary-looking people. "Are you hungry?" the old man asked. "Oh, you don't have to feed me." I tried to be polite. "I can just sit right here until the storm passes." "Nonsense, nonsense. Come this way." The old man inched forward on small, feeble steps. He held his hands out daintily in front of him, as though he were holding a thin napkin in each. He glided all the way to the staircase, and then took very slow, careful steps up. I tried to be patient with him, but it felt like it took an hour just to get up to the mezzanine. "I'm Matthew, by the way." I tried to make idle chit-chat as I followed him through a brief, candle-lit hall. "Hello, Matthew. I am Pharaoh," he said softly as we entered a large kitchen. He descended another short flight of steps, pulled a rack of mutton out of his fridge and began searing it in a pan. Even at his advanced age, he seemed to be quite a skilled chef. The mutton tasted divine, and he even served me up a glass of wine. Although he had given me bad vibes at first, I talked to him more and got to know him. He had a couple kids living around the country, and his wife had died in the past year. Kinda felt sorry for the old fella. He offered to let me stay the night, and at first I refused, but looking out the window, I realized the lightning storm had only gotten worse. He set me up in a guest room, the door of which was on the balcony overlooking the front foyer. It was dusty, and the bed sheets smelled stale, but I thanked him and readied myself for sleep as best I could. There were windows on both sides of the room as I lay in the bed. Out the left window, I could see my smashed car some distance away through the trees. I seriously hoped that if anyone else were driving on those roads, they would avoid it in time. Out my right window was a courtyard, across which I could see other wings of the large manor. To the left of the courtyard, I could see the large kitchen and the old man walking through it. And directly across from me was a grand library outfitted with several spiral staircases and reading chairs. I felt comfortable with my bedroom door locked and tried to drift off to sleep. Yet for some reason, 3 hours later, in the middle of the night, I still found myself awake. The storm was still so intense, lightning flashes every 2 seconds, and the wine had really gone through me. I needed to use the washroom. I got up from my bed and approached the door, which I noticed was open a crack. That's strange, I thought to myself. I swung the door open and gasped. The old man's hand was on the other side of the knob. "I brought you some water," he explained, holding up a glass. "Oh, thank you." I tried to be polite and hide my nerves. Where would I find the washroom?" I asked. "Oh, of course. It's just downstairs, directly below you when you come down the stairs from the mezzanine." "Oh, okay, thank you." I put the glass of water on my nightstand, noticing that it wasn't cold. It had been out of the fridge for some time. I was stuck behind the old man as he walked slowly around the foyer's balcony. I checked my phone. It was 1 a.m. "So what time do you normally go to bed?" I asked him. "Oh, I'm on my way now," he told me. "Oh, I see. Well, have a good night," I replied. The man veered off back towards the kitchen, and I descended the steps to the foyer. It took me a minute to find the stairs to the basement. They were tucked in behind a wall. I used my phone as a flashlight. The basement hall was long and narrow, with magenta and yellow striped wallpaper. I couldn't find a light fixture. All the doors down there were open, but it still took me a while to find the bathroom. Most things looked like cold or dry storage. The bathroom smelled similar to my bed sheets, stale, like it hadn't been used in 100 years. But that was probably for the best. When I finished my business, I headed back in the direction I thought I'd come from. I walked for what felt like miles down that hallway, but I couldn't find the staircase back up to the foyer. A new smell was wafting into my nose, something I didn't recognize. A faint white glow caught the corner of my eye from a room on the left. I pointed my phone flashlight in that direction to find a room filled with sheep, all hanging from the ceiling. I was alarmed, wondering if it was some sort of slaughterhouse operation the man was running, but there was very little blood, only a couple puncture wounds on some of their necks. "No way," I told myself. "He isn't a vampire, Matthew. Get over yourself." None of the sheep appeared to be dead. They were in some kind of slowed stasis, an altered state. I panicked, realizing I must have taken a wrong turn, and headed back double speed down the hall, then took a left this time after reaching the bathroom. Sure enough, I found my way back to my bedroom. I shut my door again and lay down. Across the courtyard in the great library, the old man sat on one of the chairs, reading a book. There was a large brass bulb on top of the library. It looked like a lightning rod of sorts, as lightning kept striking it. Lightning struck the courtyard, and I turned away to hide my face. I didn't want him to know that I was looking at him. Instead, I lay on my left side and watched him through the reflection of my phone screen. It wasn't until I turned away that he got up, faced the window, and watched me. Each of his hands took a turn stroking the other as he held them in front of him. His eyes were wide, and he looked excited. I shuffled my leg a bit, and he sat back down in his reading chair and opened his book once again. A cold sweat crept over my whole body. I really couldn't afford to fall asleep in this manner, but it was too dangerous to leave. I had an idea. It was the kind of thing you'd read about in a fairy tale, but I thought it might work. I got out of bed and left the sheets askew so that it was obvious I wasn't there. I crept back down the staircase into the foyer, then into the basement, and made my way into the room with the hanging sheep. I untied one that had never been bit, and carried the heavy, stupefied creature back up to my room. The old man was still reading his book. I put the body of the sheep under my blankets, and its head under the pillow. If he really was a vampire, and in the night he came in to feed, he would get the sheep instead of me. I left the animal's neck exposed and crawled into a closet by the door. The closet smelled like mildew and mothballs. I was surrounded by various ancient garments, but I slept in a few closets like that as a kid, and it wasn't too hard for me to get to sleep. I don't know how much time had passed, but I awoke to a creaking on the other side of the thin cupboard wall. The door to the guest room was opening. I held my breath, trying to make as subtle movements as possible as I shifted to the crack between the cupboard doors. The old man made his way into the room on his tiny, shuffling footsteps. At the side of the bed, he stopped and gazed down. Do you take me for an idiot? He asked. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck. I froze up, wondering if he already knew where I was. But when I saw him crawl down to all fours to check under the bed, I made a break for it. I burst outside the closet, pivoted, and ran outside the room, holding the door closed on the old man. He pounded on the door twice slowly. Then silence. My heart was racing, and instinctively, in the quiet, I looked behind me. The foyer was empty, but there was no more pressure from the other side of the bedroom door. Where was he? And what do you plan to do now, Matthew? His haggard voice sounded from the center of the foyer. I turned around to look at him. He was rising from the floor. A collection of spiders crawled into place to make up his body. I didn't trust what my eyes were telling me and kept holding the door shut. Slowly, the man started to climb the stairs. There was only one way down from the mezzanine, and it would be past him. For a moment, I was paralyzed by indecision. The man reached the top of the stairs. As he approached me on the balcony, his thin, pursed lips stretched apart, cracking and bleeding, to reveal a monstrous row of razor-pointed teeth. I had no choice. I released my hold on the doorknob and hopped the balcony railing. I landed on my ankle wrong, twisting it, but in the heat of the moment I could barely feel it. The man released a high-pitched screech as I ran for the front door and into the lightning storm. Electricity crashed into the ground all around me, but I had to take the risk. I hobbled down the driveway and up the road, abandoning my car forever. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to see the razor-toothed man again. Mysteriously, when I was about 500 meters from the house, the storm suddenly stopped. I looked up and could see stars in the night sky. How is that possible? I thought to myself. Turning around, I noted some sort of translucent wall, a bubble around the distant manor. In its center was the lightning rod, the bulb on top of the library. Lightning was not hitting it. It generated the storm.